Today we're going to try a different kind of tamale. Now this is number 2 in a series of non-traditional dessert tamales, and today it's going to be an apple pie tamale. So we're going to start with some. Here I have just some Fuji apples, and I'm not going to peel them. You know, every time you see them making a pie or something, it's like peel and core. Ooh. You eat an apple fresh, you leave the peel on, you eat everything. So why do you have to peel it when you cook it? So what I do is I just cut down the sides in a square around the core, and this is a lot quicker. And just cut them into dice. And I'm using a serrated knife because it goes through the skin really easy. If you have a regular bladed knife, it's a little bit hard, and it's not absolutely sharp. It can be a little bit difficult to get through the skin. Just a little spot there. And so you just dice these up, and we're going to cook them just for a few minutes, just enough to soften them and to get some sugar inside. So there, and I've got the rest already cut up. I've got 10 apples here, but that just kind of depends on the size. You can see I've got this is about 2 quarts of apples, okay? And then a little bit of apple juice just to have some moisture on the bottom, and a cup of brown sugar. And a tiny bit of cinnamon. Apples and cinnamon. Alright. And we're going to cook that for just a few minutes. So in the meantime, we're going to make the second part, which is the streusel. Now the streusel is going to be the stuff that you put in the center. Instead of meat like you would in a chicken tamale, we're going to put some streusel in the center, and then the apple is going to be mixed in the masa, and that'll be around it. Okay? So we'll start that next. Alright, so that apple has been cooking about 5-10 minutes, and I'm just going to let it cool down now. Now we get the streusel set up. Now this is real simple. It's just a 2-to-1 ratio of 1 cup, let's say, in this case I've got 4 cups of flour and 2 cups of brown sugar and 2 cups of butter. Or margarine, whatever you want to use. And I'm going to use cinnamon, but if you have like an apple cobbler recipe or something, this is about a tablespoon there, maybe a little more. Cinnamon and apple is good. And you like to put a little nutmeg or allspice, whatever, in there, go ahead and do that. You know, you can spice it up any way you want, but make sure that you keep the 2-to-1 ratio. That way the streusel will be in the right crumbly texture. All we do is just turn this on nice and low, because if you turn it on high, you're going to end up blowing dust everywhere. And just let that run for a few minutes until it gets nice and crumbly. So here, it's finished mixing, and make sure that you clean the paddles and scrape down the sides at least once while it's mixing. And shut it off, of course. So now that's all done. And we'll get that put up in a bowl, and then we're going to make the masa. Now, in the case of the masa, now, you know, purists, of course, they're going to say you got to use the fresh stuff made, you know, grind up the corn and everything. But in the case like a dessert tamale, if you make your own, you're able to manipulate the flavor a little bit more, because the bag recipe will call for the use of water. And since we're going to mix our own, instead of using water, I'm going to use apple juice, so we can get more fruit flavor into the tamale instead of just what you would get from the fruit itself. Okay, so now here for the masa, I'm just following the directions on the bag basically, but I'm doubling it. So instead of 2 cups, I'm going to use 4 cups of the masa, and then instead of 2/3 of a cup of shortening, or manteca, but I'm using vegetable shortening because this is a dessert. I'm going to use, so I've got 1 1/3 cups of shortening, and then it calls for 1 teaspoon, so I'm going to put 2 of baking powder. This gives it a little leavening when you steam it, so it's not so dense. And then it calls for 4 cups of water. But I'm making a dessert and I want it to have more flavor, so instead of water, like I said before, I'm going to use some apple juice. So pour it in nice and easy. This is going to be good. So, let that mix in. Now it's a good idea to make sure you scrape down, because you can see here some of the shortening got stuck up here on the top of the paddle. And just push it all down so it can all get mixed in properly. Let that mix for a few minutes, and even give it this, because now it's important. You want to give it some air. That's important when you're making tamales. If you don't, they're going to end up being really dense. So now here, as I mentioned before, since I'm making a dessert tamale, now a lot of times when you go to a tamaleria, or a place that sells tamales, they're going to sell during the Christmas season strawberry and pineapple. So what they'll do is, after they have the base masses, they're going to add a fruit puree to it. So we're going to do the same thing. I've got some apple juice here, or apple sauce, and I'm going to add a little bit to it. Just like you saw me do with the chocolate one, with the chocolate sauce, we're going to add some apple sauce. So I'm going to add 1 cup. Now, I want to be careful here, because one of the problems is if the masa is too thin, it's hard to form. It's still going to set up, because if you've ever made polenta before, corn can absorb 4 times its volume in liquid. So that's not a problem, but it's just shaping it into a tamale that's going to give you trouble. So if you add too much liquid to it, you'll still have something that's going to come out right if you can just get it into the right shape. So we got to be careful. So here, I've got, what have I got? Oh, I think we might be able to get away with a 2nd cup of apple. But I'm going to wait, because now I'm going to mix in these apples, and there's a little bit of liquid in there too. So let's do that first and then see what we get. Okay, so I've got my cooled off apples that I cooked from before, and here I'm just going to mix this right into the pot with the rest of the apples. Okay. And at this point, I'm using a spatula because I want those apples to stay whole. If you use a whip or some sort of a hard stirring implement like a steel spoon or something like that, you're going to break those apples up into bits. And I don't want that. I want you to be able to, when you get one, you're going to bite into it and you're going to get a piece of apple in every bite. So there we go, all nice and mixed up. I'm going to taste this. I think a little more brown sugar is in order here. I'm going to add another cup. It's just not sweet enough. Yeah, a cup and a half. Okay, so as you can see, just like before on the chocolate clip, you know, I'm using my colander with the straight sides and the feet on there, and I put water in there that comes up just to the bottom, and I'm throwing in some pennies, because when it starts to boil, they're going to start bouncing and making a noise, letting me know that it's time to start the timer. Okay? Now we'll begin to roll them up, and it's just like any tamale. Take the soaked corn husk, put some of this stuff in here. And I want them not too big. And then a nice good pinch of this streusel down in the middle. And then we're going to roll them up and set them in there. And just lean them standing up against one another. Kind of like leaning dominoes. So now I've finished rolling them up. And I've got them all sitting in here. And I'm just going to cover this up with a piece of foil. And when I start hearing those pennies start to bounce, then I'll start the timer. And it'll take about 40 minutes or so. You can always tell because with the leavening in there, they're going to puff just like a cake. And so they'll be sticking out of the tops of the corn husks. And then you'll know that they're done. So there's not an exact time. Just go by when they puff, and then they'll be ready to go. Oh, I think they're done. Look at that. Big chunks of apple. I think a little bit of vanilla ice cream is in order. Oh yeah. See you next time.